Welcome back to Forging Radical Hope, a special podcast mini-series from the American Journal of Public Health 2024 Student Think Tank. I'm Sam Mendez, back with co-host Jennifer Wells for part 2 of our first episode, Pitching the Future of Public Health. Part 2 features special guest Marcus Weinman. Quick recap. In line with the theme for the AJPH May issue, we invited a couple of friends to give us a pitch for the future of public health, and you'll get to vote on a winner who we'll spotlight in our newsletter and on LinkedIn. Part 1 featured Kathleen Patty, an MPH student at University of North Florida, and Part 2 features Marcus Weinman, a PhD candidate at the University of Vermont. We talked about online community building, grassroots organizing, and the serendipity of putting yourself out there on the internet. And just a quick note, the views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the speakers. They don't necessarily reflect the American Public Health Association, the American Journal of Public Health, or the AJPH Student Think Tank. So without further ado, let's hear from Marcus.
My name is Marcus Weinman. I'm a fifth-year PhD candidate at the University of Vermont. I actually currently work in the neuroscience lab of Dr. James Stafford, but aside from my actual epilepsy research, which is what I do, I have been talking about public health, especially in the context of COVID-19, since the beginning of the pandemic. I was sort of recruited, not by choice, into having a lot of COVID-focused conversations about public health with my family, because I am the only one with any scientific training at all in my immediate family, and I have multiple immunocompromised family members. So I was solicited to try and help figure out what all was going on in relation to the procession of COVID. I have a bachelor's and a master's in microbiology, so I think as COVID hit, I was relatively well suited to step into that role because I had at least some degree of formal academic training to talk about that. And as COVID continued to evolve, I began my PhD program like right when things hit. I sort of stepped into a greater role as a science communicator. I had enough of a training background to function as a sort of a generalist. And I took to the internet to sort of have the conversations that I was having with my family and try to spread that knowledge and information to other people. So I began a live stream on twitch.tv, which started out as a website to showcase a video game gameplay. But it's since grown into an all-purpose internet live streaming website where people can live stream just about whatever they want. So I've been working on a community building effort / science communication live stream since the end of 2020, early 2021, right when the vaccine rollout was just getting started. And since then, I've managed to grow a reasonably sized community around the idea of public health. So I'm here to have a conversation with the both of you to sort of use those insights and tell you some of the things that I've learned and how that's kind of shaped my vision for what the future of public health could look like. So once again, thank you for having me. I'm very appreciative of any opportunity to spread the good word of science.
We also played Two Truths and a Lie to get to know Marcus a little bit better. Can you guess which of these personal facts about Marcus is false?
My front teeth are fake. I've touched the Stanley Cup, and I met President Obama.
Can you show us your teeth, please?
There you go. They're right here.
That's so you're
Okay.
I know you're in Vermont, so I feel like for some reason that gives me hockey, but maybe that's completely off. But I feel like Stanley Cup feels feasible for that part of the country.
I mean, but the other two are also feasible for any part of the country.
Mm-hmm.
It's difficult, trust me.
Yeah. I want to say you haven't met Obama.
I was gonna say that too. Okay, I feel like we got
You both nailed it. Yeah, that one's the lie.
Okay.
Yeah, that one's the lie.
Look, I would have given it to Sam, but this is my first time talking to you, so
it just means you got some good intuition. I actually touched the Stanley Cup when I was growing up in Colorado. I think my mom knew the friend of like a coach on the team, and so when it was his turn to like get the cup, he basically had like a neighborhood block party where people just came by and like took pictures with the cup. So there's a picture floating around somewhere of like 7-year-old me or 8-year-old me in a Harry Potter shirt right next to the Stanley Cup.
Nice.
And then my front teeth are technically they're not like removable fake. It's not like a party trick where I can just like take them out and look like I just finished a game of hockey. But rather I chipped them playing football at recess when I was a kid. I ran face first into a fence post trying to catch a pass. So one of them is a crown and the other one's a veneer, but the actual tooth itself is long gone. It's all artificial.
Next up, a more professional round of Two Truths and a Lie focused on Marcus's research experience.
All right, so here are my 3 things about my research background. I took specimens from my own dog for research. I almost got kicked by a llama trying to do a lab experiment. And I took organs from a cadaver for research immediately after an autopsy.
So, which of those 3 is the lie? Did you guess?
My advisor at that time actually, I think, took samples from his own dog for some of our work, because he was a veterinarian. So, A, he had the background to do it, but B, surprisingly, getting folks to consent to use their companion animal for research purposes is much more difficult than you'd think because of the emotional attachment. And like, that's not faulting anybody who says no, because like I get it, but that actually led to the 3rd statement one time. When the one moment someone actually said yes, it's like, well, at that time we needed their dog's hypothalamus for an actual lab experiment. So I distinctly remember me and one of my other advisors at that time waiting outside of the necropsy ward to get freshly excised brain tissue from a dog that was euthanized because they were terminal for other unrelated reasons, because somebody consented for their dog to be used in research. So I remember sort of being on the outside, like, all right, I've got like the buffers and everything. I got my gloves on, like I'm ready to get this fresh bloody piece of dog brain for a lab experiment today. So yeah, working in vet med, you get to see some wild stuff.
Yeah.
And for his vision of the future of public health, Marcus pitched us an all-new public health corps to support local health agencies and preempt national public health emergencies. Let's listen in.
Yeah, I think my vision's relatively pie in the sky, but I also think it's a lot more feasible than people would give it credit for. So I'm actually kind of excited to sort of defend it in a sense. My vision is a sort of bench to bedside style pipeline for public health, right? That sort of idea is used a lot in sort of like drug development and life sciences more broadly speaking. But I really think the last 4 years of COVID have shown me that there's a lot of potential to go from even brand new novel pathogen to treatments, vaccines, therapeutics, and forging connections between public health entities in a much more robust fashion than what's been happening over the last 4 years. So my dream is to essentially take the surplus of PhD graduates we have in the life sciences and sort of create like a public health core that has a very broad and robust capacity in every aspect of how we've, I think, dropped the ball on COVID, to sort of shore all of these things up and create an actual robust workforce that can tackle just about any aspect of any pandemic, whether it's novel, whether it's a pathogen we've known about for 20 years, right? Something that any question anybody has, anytime anybody is in need, there is an actual sector of public health workers with training and connections in terms of specific municipalities, localities, states, and even the federal government.
Well, I really like the sound of it. I guess what's like a scenario you imagine someone in this public health corps responding to?
Oh, I mean, I don't really actually have to do too much imagining because I'm watching the H5N1 situation unfold right now, and I see a lot of parallels in terms of like my vision. So I'll kind of use that as sort of an example of like what we're doing right now versus how I think a public health corps would more robustly respond. So what I think needs to be done right now is a much more broad testing of cows across dairy farms all across the nation, and testing of other animals that could function as a reservoir for such a thing, such a virus. So broad testing of pigs, developing maybe more specific tests, and then actual public health community partnerships with farmers that actually manifest in a way where the farmers aren't like scared of public health officials, where they think that the public health officials are actually there to help and keep their business afloat instead of, ruin everything and cast them into financial catastrophe. I think I also sort of envision this idea of, I think we could have a public health corps just deployed out to these farms to get a much broader collection of sequences. And then I would also like to have sort of like a unit of this corps about like vaccine development, because that's going to be one of the big things if this becomes a human pandemic, which it might not. But if it does, there are like a couple of candidate viruses already sent to manufacturers, and we have a little bit in the stockpile, but like we're going to need a whole new clinical trial from scratch. And then we have to make at least 2 doses a person, and like that whole process is estimated to take the better part of a year, like at least 9 months. So I would like to get a head start on that with like a vaccine development group within this corps, where looking at some of these sequences, maybe making some additional candidate viruses to have ready to go for vaccine development, to actually work with the pharmaceutical manufacturers to get that process moving as quick as reasonably possible. Because I think if we had a human pandemic of H5N1, the stakes are a lot higher than they were for SARS-CoV-2, given the much higher fatality rate of H5N1 comparatively. So sort of in that framework of that vision, what I see is this idea of just about every aspect of future planning, right? Even if this never happens, I would rather be prepared and have everything that you need to tackle it if it does. If you don't need it, great, you can put it on the shelf, put it in the freezer, and it's there for the future in case you do need it. But like, it's better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it. I very much feel like the current response, where like we're not testing all the animals. I don't know if there's any testing in pigs. The virus is like in milk, and there's still some uncertainty about pasteurization taking care of it. Like there should be some formal testing done there in a publicly facing capacity. I think like a public health corps could just run that experiment in a week instead of like us relying on USDA statements to try and read tea leaves to figure that out. Like some just to respond to questions that people are going to have about the current evolving situation, a public health corps would just be ready, do that experiment, done, small little like letter to a journal, and now it's publicly available. Everybody can see it, they can look at the data and have that question actually answered. So that way there's not broad panic and concern and people pouring out their milk into the sink and everything. Because like that's kind of what I see on social media happening and on Twitch happening. They're scared, they're panicking, they're like, oh my god, am I being forced to go vegan? Like what's happening? I don't know what's going on. And there's just a giant void of information. A public health corps could fill that void, because I've learned on Twitch, when that void exists, all the bad faith actors and misinformation spreaders, they're the ones who are going to fill it. So I would rather have a legitimate entity full of trained scientists working to fill that void of information with actual data, that's peer-reviewed, published in really quick time.
The wanting to go into policy or advocacy part of me, mostly the policy part of me, is like, oh, I'm sensing every single barrier there could possibly be. But as someone who works at the Suwannee Department of Health in Florida said the other day, we have so many opportunities ahead of us. We don't refer to anything as problems. So those barriers are actually just opportunities to overcome. And I think,
go ahead.
I do think you said it's feasible, and I think it is. We got to do that grassroots organizing.
Yeah, I think maybe I'll offer sort of a closing thought in that specific vein on like the grassroots organizing context, because like this is something I've gotten in my training all the time. Like I got this in my program, I've gotten this in my alma mater with my bachelor's, my master's. This is just an institution thing, but I always get you're not supposed to do organizing or politics. That science isn't political. Like that is the exact wrong approach. Like you have to actually use grassroots organizing to grow and protect the institution. And if you don't do that, then it's just going to sort of wither and atrophy. And I think that's kind of brought us to where we are now, is we don't have sort of that grassroots advocacy from the academics to bring us to that point where these problems can actually be viewed as opportunities, right? The headspace isn't let's get creative and solve this, or let's try to solicit some investment so we can actually seize this opportunity to make the infrastructure better. It's we're never getting that, so let's just give up. Like that's more or less what we arrive at time after time again. So I think changing the actual philosophy and headspace that like, yeah, a lot of this is a political endeavor at the end of the day, and we need to engage in that advocacy, will sort of transmogrify that problem into an opportunity that we are actually more excited and invested in solving. An example of this, I think, is what I've colloquially nicknamed the variant watchers, a group of citizen scientists, some of whom are credentialed, some of whom are not. Literally just on Twitter. Like, they've been posting on Twitter since 2020. They comb through COVID variant sequences and have been for years, trying to like look at mutations and figure out, you know, how this one might make a certain variant cause a wave, or if there's any sort of biochemistry consequences of this mutation or this collection of mutations, or, you know, when the first Omicron showed up, you know, this thing has like a bunch of mutations. What does this mean for our immunity and our vaccines? Like, that work was grassroots organizing from people who cared on Twitter, some of whom were academics, some of whom weren't.
This conversation led nicely to our closing question. What is giving you hope right now?
I'll say on a personal level, with respect to like the Twitch communication efforts in my Twitch community, they give me more hope than I think they realize, because, you know, as somebody who kind of stares into the abyss as an academic more often, I'm always afraid that sometimes it will stare back into me. And those are the people, I think this is the value of community connection, even for me as an academic, is they get to tell me about how they've implemented some of the things that I've told them. I think one story that always sticks with me in particular is somebody who I told, like, hey, there's like a wave coming, another variant just showed up, it has a bunch of mutations, like it's surging in Europe, it's going to be here any minute. There's somebody who I kind of basically said, like, especially if you're like planning a Christmas visit with your family, like, you guys might want to take some precautions, might want to do some testing, or maybe even mask up at a large like Christmas party or something. And so someone in my community took that advice, and he was the only person who didn't get COVID at the Christmas party. So like, I've heard so many stories from just my community where they tell me these things, and that always gives me hope, where, you know, I just kind of did this. I always say my Twitch stream is more or less an elaborate coping mechanism for me, because I felt like I was just kind of powerless as COVID was happening all around me. So this has, I think, shown me that I can make a difference, even if it's online and kind of outside of the public eye, offline and sort of not visible to even my own. I don't even think my advisor knows that I do this. Like, I don't think I've told him any of this at all. So, you know, just kind of doing this on my own volition by myself, at least to start with, that gives me hope that you can, if you care enough and you want to put in the work, that you can make a difference, truly. Like, this is not all foregone, this is not all inevitable, the world's not going to collapse immediately. If you care enough, you can actually put in effort and dedicate time and energy to trying to, you know, take one of these problems, turn it into an opportunity to grow, to help you and your communities prosper and protect themselves. So that's personally what gives me hope, is just this sort of continuous feedback I get from my Twitch community, where you know, we're all kind of just doing infectious disease as a spectator sport and keeping ourselves safe, because that's kind of what it boils down to, is tracking all the germs and figuring out if we need to do anything differently. But people have grown, I think, because of it, and they help me grow as a consequence. It's symbiotic, right? Community participation, symbiotic. But yeah, I'm very hopeful, because I feel like we could just broadly expand on this philosophy a lot more and make public health better.
Any closing words, Jennifer?
No, thank you for, well, I say no, and then I start to say something. Thank you for speaking with us tonight.
Of course.
Where can we find you on Twitch? Because I am looking you up after this.
Absolutely. My Twitch stream you can find at twitch.tv/homozygote. My username is a genetics pun. I'm a nerd at heart. It's spelled like the animal, though. So HOMOZYGOAT. So like the animal goat. Twitch.tv/homozygote. I think there's a link in my Twitter bio. My Twitter handle is the same, with an underscore at the end. And then I'm also on Blue Sky as a homozygote. So those are the three places where you can find me. But Twitch, I stream Tuesdays and Thursdays, 6:30 p.m. Eastern, and I'm usually on there for about 7 to 8 hours. Then every once in a while, I'll throw a Saturday stream in, but that's more or less I'm trying to play video games to decompress kind of deal. Less public health conversation and more just kind of hanging out with the community. But those are the places and times where you can find me most often.
We hope you enjoyed those conversations as much as we did. Stay tuned for a few more podcast episodes from us throughout the year, where we'll have even more fun playing around with this format. Don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn for more student highlights and to take part in our poll to decide who gets a special shout out in our newsletter.